Hello everyone, my name is Vanish Signal and I am here to help you today. I know you watch this video to fall asleep, so before that, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Leave it in the comments below. I rented a cabin because I needed to disappear for a while. Not in a dramatic, running from the law kind of way, but in the quieter, more suffocating sense of someone who'd spent too much time pretending to be fine. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No texts, no updates. I just packed a bag, left the city, and followed the directions to a place that didn't show up on any map. The listing was vague. Mountain hideaway, no neighbors, no distractions, full solitude. But that was exactly what I wanted. I didn't even care that the photos were a little blurry or that the host never responded to my messages. Something about the silence surrounding it made me feel like this was the kind of place that didn't want to be found. That suited me perfectly. The road there was barely a road at all. Just a winding dirt trail hidden behind a gas station and an overgrown sign pointing east into the woods. I drove for what felt like forever. Climbing higher and higher, the trees growing thicker, the daylight dimming by the mile. I lost cell signal an hour in, and the silence that followed was immediate and absolute. No notifications, no music, just the hum of the engine and the occasional thump of a stray rock under my tires. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you've gone back in time. Like the world you knew just stops existing the further you go. When I finally reached the cabin, the sun was just starting to dip behind the trees, casting everything in that deep, golden hour glow that somehow made the place feel both breathtaking and completely wrong. It looked older than the pictures suggested. Weathered wood, crooked porch, windows darkened by years of dust or something heavier. The front door creaked when I pushed it open, revealing a small single-room interior with a fireplace, a bed, a table, and a kitchenette that looked barely functional. There was no electricity, just oil lamps and a stack of dry firewood in the corner. I told myself it was fine, that this was what I came here for, to get away from people, from noise, from myself. I lit a lamp, unpacked my bag, and sat down at the table with a notebook and pen. For the first time in months, I felt the weight in my chest start to lift. But that didn't last long. It started with the smell. Faint at first, just a hint of something off. Not rot exactly, but something old, stagnant, almost metallic, like rusted pipes or the inside of a long-forgotten basement. I assumed it was the cabin itself. Old buildings have their own funk, and this one hadn't been aired out in who knows how long. But the smell didn't stay in one place. It moved. Some nights I'd wake up with it heavy in my nose, thick and choking like I was buried under the floorboards. Other times, I'd be sitting near the window, and it would waft in behind me like something had just been standing there, breathing down my neck. Then there were the footprints. They appeared on the third morning, just outside the front porch. Small, barefoot prints in the dirt, too small to be mine, too narrow to belong to a man. They circled the cabin, stopped at the windows, and vanished before they reached the woods again. No path in, no path out. Just perfect, clean indentations, as if someone had stepped down from the sky, wandered around my cabin in the middle of the night, and disappeared into thin air. I stared at them for a long time, my coffee forgotten and going cold in my hand, trying to convince myself they were from before I arrived. Leftovers from some old visitor, a child maybe, or a local out for a barefoot walk. But deep down, I knew better. The ground had been soft from rain the night before. Those prints were fresh. I started locking the door after that. Not just the handle, but the deadbolt and a metal rod wedged against it for good measure. I blocked the windows with the spare blankets from the closet and moved the table in front of the front door each night. Every instinct in me screamed to leave. But I stayed. Maybe out of pride, maybe out of some twisted curiosity, or maybe because I felt like I was too far gone to go back to my normal life anyway. Each night, I sat up with the oil lamp burning low, waiting for the sounds I knew would come. Scratching at the walls, faint tapping on the glass, whispers too soft to understand, but too real to ignore. They came without fail, and I started marking the time. Always between 2:10 and 2:20 in the morning. 10 minutes of activity, always in that same window. Then silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels like the air is holding its breath. By the 5th night, I was starting to lose it. Sleep-deprived, anxious, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. I kept telling myself it was in my head, a product of isolation, of too much time alone with my thoughts. I tried not to think about the fact that I hadn't seen a single animal since arriving. No birds, no squirrels, not even a bug on the window. The woods were dead silent, and the silence had weight. One morning, I found a note under the front door. A scrap of yellowed paper, the edges torn, the handwriting sharp and hurried. It read, "Do not look into the mirror, especially not after midnight." That was it. No explanation, no signature, just that one warning. The thing is, I hadn't noticed a mirror until then. But when I walked back inside, I saw it. An old, oval-shaped one mounted above the fireplace, covered in a thick layer of dust. I don't know how I missed it before. It felt like it had just appeared, like the cabin had grown it overnight. I stood in front of it for a long time, trying to remember if it had always been there. My reflection stared back, blurry through the dust, my own face looking thinner, my eyes sunken and bloodshot. I left it alone. That night, I covered it with a bed sheet and pushed the armchair in front of it, just in case. I should have left. I know that now. But something had settled in the back of my mind, a quiet voice that whispered, "You're being watched," every time I tried to convince myself to go. I started talking out loud, not just to break the silence, but to assert myself, to hear something besides the low thrum of dread humming in the walls. I read aloud from my notebook, talked through meals, even narrated my thoughts just to hear my own voice. But late at night, I could swear something else was whispering back, not echoing, responding. The worst moment came on the 7th night. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing. I didn't know why at first. No sound, no light, just a gut-deep sense of being watched. I turned on the lamp, swung my legs over the bed, and nearly screamed. There were wet footprints on the wooden floor, starting at the edge of my bed and leading back toward the covered mirror. Each step was soaked, as if someone had walked out of a lake and into my room, dripping with something thicker than a water. I stared at them for a long time, unable to move, unable to look away. When I finally did, I pulled the blankets around me and waited for morning, never taking my eyes off the covered mirror. I didn't sleep after that. Couldn't. I stayed up, flashlight in hand, door barricaded, every window checked and double-checked. I watched the mirror until dawn, convinced that if I let my guard down, something behind that sheet would reach out. The whispers got louder. Not words, but tones. Mocking, almost amused. I was cracking, and I knew it. But what was worse was the feeling that the cabin wanted me to. That it fed off every doubt, every skipped heartbeat, every time I considered walking outside and never coming back. That morning, I found another note under the door. This one was shorter, smeared with something dark. It read, "It's not the mirror you should be afraid of. It's what remembers you when you leave." I burned it without thinking. The second story begins with an old man named Everett, who had lived alone for over 3 decades in the fading outskirts of a forgotten mining town. His house sat at the end of a dirt road most maps didn't bother labeling, half buried by wind-swept soil and the slow crawl of nature reclaiming what had been lost. Everett had long grown accustomed to silence, to the dry creak of his floorboards, the soft whistle of wind through cracked windows, and the occasional coyote cry in the distant hills. But on one peculiar night in October, when the moon hung unnaturally low and orange in the sky, he heard something that didn't belong. The slow, deliberate sound of knuckles rapping against his front door. This would have been strange enough, but what made it more disturbing was that Everett hadn't told anyone where he lived in years, and there were no neighbors for miles in any direction. He sat motionless in his chair, the old recliner groaning under his weight as he reached to mute the static buzz of his radio. The knock came again. 1, 2, 3. Not hurried, not desperate, just calm and patient, as if whoever was out there knew he'd open eventually. Against better judgment, Everett stood and shuffled toward the door, the rusted lantern in his hand, casting flickering shadows against the walls. As he reached for the handle, he hesitated. A voice, small and wrong, whispered from the other side, "Please, it's cold." It was the voice of a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, trembling but soft. Everett's heart sank. It had been years since he'd seen children, let alone heard one. Every instinct told him not to open the door, but a lifetime of being human outweighed his better judgment. He unlatched the deadbolt, pulled the door inward, and stared out into the cold night. But there was no child, no footsteps in the dirt, no shadows darting behind the trees, only the wind, now unnaturally still. He stepped out onto the porch, his eyes scanning the dark. The voice came again, clearer now, and unmistakably behind him, inside the house. "It's cold in here." He spun around, the lantern nearly slipping from his grip. The door he had just opened was now shut tight. Everett rushed inside and slammed the door shut, securing every lock he had. The house was dark except for the weak halo of light from his lantern. His eyes swept the room. No sign of movement, but the air felt colder and thicker, like breathing through a wet towel. He backed away from the door, heart thudding violently. Then the smell hit him. Wet earth, not mud, not rain-soaked grass, but deep, rotting soil, the kind unearthed from graves. He followed the scent toward the hallway that led to the guest bedroom. That door was ajar now, even though he remembered it being shut for months. He hadn't used that room since his brother died. He slowly pushed it open. The room looked unchanged, except for the small child standing at the foot of the bed. She wore a tattered white dress, her bare feet blackened with soil. Her eyes were pitch black, not empty sockets, but glistening obsidian, reflecting nothing. Everett didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat locked. The child tilted her head slightly, her mouth parting into a grin too wide for her face. "You opened the door?" she said in a voice far older than her appearance. "Now you have to see." The lights in the room blew out. The lantern sputtered, and Everett found himself staring not at a little girl, but at a hole. An impossibly deep, gaping pit where the floor had once been. It hadn't been there seconds ago. It breathed. He could feel the air sucked downward, pulling heat, sound, even light into its endless hunger. He tried to back away, but his legs refused to obey. Then the girl, or whatever wore her face, walked toward him. "You left the door open too long," she whispered, now inches from his face. "And now they're coming through." From behind her, something rose out of the hole, tall, limbless, its body writhing with countless mouths that whispered in unison. Words Everett didn't know, and yet understood. Words that begged, pleaded, demanded. Things that had waited too long. His knees gave out. He collapsed, the lantern smashing beside him, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the faint green glow now rising from the pit. Tendrils emerged, wet, skeletal appendages that defied anatomy. They didn't grab him. Not yet. They just reached toward the walls, the ceiling, spreading mold and rot with every inch they touched. The house groaned as if in pain. Everett crawled backward, reaching for the hallway, for anything that would take him away. But every step he took made the hallway longer, the walls stretching outward like melted wax. And the girl followed. Not running, just walking. Always walking. Never getting closer. Never falling behind. She watched with eyes that had seen too many centuries. "You should have stayed quiet," she said. "We were almost forgotten." He finally made it to the kitchen, heart hammering like a war drum, his breath now ragged gasps. The telephone hung on the wall. He snatched it, dialing blindly. No signal, just static. But through the static, a voice broke through. A familiar one. His brother, dead 5 years. "You brought them back," the voice said. "Why, Everett? Why'd you open it again?" He dropped the phone, his legs buckled. On the table sat his radio, still humming softly as if untouched by the chaos around him. He staggered toward it. Maybe it could drown them out. Maybe he could use it to call for help. But as he reached for the dial, the girl appeared beside him, not walking anymore, just there, instantaneously. She placed a cold hand on his wrist. "It's not just this house anymore," she said. "You let them out." Everett screamed. A sound no one would hear. The desert would stay silent, the town still forgotten, the dirt road still unlabeled. But deep beneath his crumbling home, in the earth that had been closed too long, something breathed freely now. Something that fed on memory, and voice, and fear. And Everett, now just another whisper in the chorus, sat at the window for eternity, waiting for the next knock. They called it the Candle Room. That was never its real name, of course. It didn't even have a name. Just a room in an abandoned house no one really talked about unless they were trying to scare someone younger. It sat at the edge of Harrow Street, where the pavement gave up and the weeds began. The house it belonged to had been boarded up for years. Windows covered, doors chained, warnings graffitied onto the exterior in fading spray paint. "Stay out! She's still inside. Don't light it." Of course, those warnings did exactly what they weren't supposed to do. Make it interesting, especially to teenagers with too much time and too little sense. Lena, Oscar, and Marcy were 3 such teens. The kind who laughed through horror movies and dared each other to stay the night in haunted places. They didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. But urban legends were a kind of rite of passage, and every town had at least one place that everyone claimed was cursed. The Candle Room was Harrow's favorite nightmare. The story went something like this. A girl once lived in that house, quiet, strange, never seen during the day. She collected candles, hundreds of them. They filled her bedroom, melted onto every surface. She was always lighting them, whispering to them. Her parents thought she was sick, maybe sleepwalking or hallucinating, until they found her sitting in the middle of her room one night, smiling in a circle of lit candles. Her eyes had turned completely black. She told them she was talking to the ones beneath. A week later, the house caught fire. Her parents died in the blaze. She didn't. Not physically. People say she still lives in the candle room. Or rather, something lives there now. Something that can only be reached if you bring a new candle, light it yourself, and speak her name. Lena had heard the tale 100 times before, but she didn't believe a word of it. So when Marcy dared her to sneak into the candle room one Friday night with a white candle and a lighter, she didn't hesitate. Oscar didn't like the idea, not really, but he followed anyway. That's how it always worked. Lena dared, Marcy pushed, Oscar followed. They cut through the backyard of the old house just after midnight. The moon was full, casting just enough light to see the outline of the roof, still half collapsed from the fire all those years ago. Lena found a broken window on the side and climbed in first, landing on creaky floorboards littered with ash and debris. The others followed, trying to suppress their nervous laughter. The house smelled like rot and soot. The air was unnaturally still. It felt less like a house and more like a tomb. They didn't speak much as they moved through the hallways. Everything felt muted, the silence so dense it muffled even their footsteps. They found the candle room upstairs. The door was shut but not locked. Its surface was covered in melted wax, white, red, black. Oscar hesitated. "Guys," he said quietly, "what if the story's true?" Lena rolled her eyes and pushed open the door. The room inside was small, windowless, and wrong. The walls were covered in scorched wallpaper. The ceiling bowed from fire damage. But what stood out most was the floor. A perfect circle of melted candles, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, arranged with ritualistic precision. Some had burned down to puddles. Others looked newly placed. There was no dust on the floor, no cobwebs. It was like someone had been taking care of it. Lena couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The girl spoke. Her voice was soft, almost tender. "You lit the candle." No one replied. "You opened the circle." Oscar pounded on the door again. "Let us out. You belong to us now." The candles flared, blinding bright, then extinguished all at once. The room plunged into pitch darkness. Marcy screamed. The door flung open behind them, and they didn't hesitate. They ran. Down the stairs, through the hallway, out the window they'd come in through. They didn't stop running until they reached the street. Only then did they turn around. The house was gone. Not burned. Not destroyed. Just missing. As if it had never existed. Behind them, only a field of tall grass and the faint, lingering smell of wax. The three of them didn't speak for weeks. Something had followed them out. They could feel it. The flicker of candlelight in the corners of their rooms. The scent of burning wax with no source. The whispers in the night. A month later, Marcy disappeared. No signs of struggle, just gone. Oscar stopped sleeping. He told Lena one night, voice shaking, that he dreamed of the candle room. Every night. The blue flames. The girl with waxy hair. She called to him now, asked him to bring more candles, more names. Lena doesn't go out anymore. Her windows are boarded, her house locked tight. But sometimes, at exactly midnight, neighbors see a soft blue glow flicker behind her curtains. They say you can hear whispering if you stand too close, and if you listen too long, you might just find yourself walking toward it, candle in hand, name on your lips. Elliot never believed in curses. He was an engineer, logical to the core, and prided himself on solving problems with evidence and calculations, not rumors. That's why he accepted the job in the first place. A routine structural assessment of an old church scheduled for demolition. Easy money, simple paperwork, or so he thought. The building stood in a dead part of town, surrounded by crumbling sidewalks and empty lots. It was the last remnant of a neighborhood swallowed by economic collapse and slow decay. The church had been abandoned for nearly 4 decades, but the city had finally approved funds to tear it down and repurpose the land. All it needed was Elliot's final sign-off to declare the structure unstable. One visit, in and out, simple. He arrived just after sunrise. The air was thick with early autumn fog, and the church loomed out of it like a monument to forgotten things. Its stone walls were blackened by years of rain and smog, and the steeple leaned slightly to one side, as if bowing under the weight of its own history. The iron gate squealed when he pushed it open. Inside, the silence was immediate and consuming. Dust coated every surface. The pews were mostly intact, though warped from moisture. Stained glass windows filtered pale, colorless light into the nave, casting distorted patterns across the floor. It felt like walking into a mouth that had long forgotten the taste of prayer. Elliot started taking notes on the structural wear, pacing the main aisle, tapping beams and measuring cracks. He told himself the cold that crept into his bones was from the draft, that the feeling of being watched was just the mind adjusting to the stillness. But when he reached the altar, he paused. There was something strange about the back wall. Unlike the rest of the church, this section had no windows, no fixtures, just a heavy iron door, bolted and chained. He hadn't seen it on the blueprints. Curiosity overrode caution. He pried off the rusted padlock with a crowbar, wincing at the metallic snap. The door groaned as he opened it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the dark. He should have turned back then. Should have taken the unusual addition as a red flag and reported it. But something pulled at him, a need to see what was hidden. He descended slowly, flashlight beam dancing across stone walls slick with condensation. The air smelled like soil and old metal. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a small crypt-like chamber. Candles, long extinguished, lined the walls in rusted holders. An altar sat in the center of the room. Simple stone, worn smooth with time. Symbols were etched into it, old and angular, the kind of language that felt wrong just looking at it. Elliot stepped closer, brushing dust from the altar's surface. That's when the whispering started. At first, he thought it was the wind funneling through cracks in the stone. But it wasn't wind. The voices were distinct, low, rhythmic, chanting in some forgotten tongue. He spun around, flashlight shaking, but there was no one there. And then he saw it. A mirror leaning against the far wall, nearly 6 feet tall. Oddly out of place, its surface spotless compared to the surrounding decay. He stepped toward it, mesmerized. The reflection didn't match the room. Behind him in the glass was a version of the crypt that was cleaner, more complete. The candles were lit, casting warm orange light. The altar gleamed like polished marble. But what stole Elliot's breath was the figure standing at the altar in the reflection. A man in old robes, face hidden beneath a black hood. The figure raised his head slowly, revealing empty sockets where his eyes should have been. Elliot turned around. The crypt was empty. He looked back at the mirror. Now the hooded man was closer. Just behind Elliot's shoulder in the reflection, reaching out a hand. Not moving in real time, only in the mirror. Elliot jumped back with a cry, heart hammering. The flashlight flickered. When it steadied, the mirror was covered in cracks. The reflection was gone. Elliot didn't remember climbing the stairs, didn't recall getting back to the main floor. He just knew he was outside, gasping for air, palms scraped from falling on stone steps. He reported the crypt to the city immediately, suggested the demolition be expedited, said the structure was dangerous, that there were unsafe underground levels not listed in any records. They didn't ask questions. The demolition was moved up to the following week. But the dreams started that night. At first, it was just the crypt. He'd find himself standing at the bottom of the stairs again, candlelight flickering, the air heavy with whispers. Then he'd see the mirror. And each time, the hooded man would be closer, at the edge of the frame, then halfway across the room, then standing directly behind him. After a few nights, Elliot stopped sleeping. The dreams bled into his waking hours. Shadows moved in his peripheral vision. He'd catch glimpses of robed figures reflected in windows, only to turn and find nothing there. He began covering mirrors in his home, stopped leaving the house after dark. His friends thought he was having a breakdown. He didn't argue. Then the city called. They couldn't demolish the church. Something kept damaging the equipment. Bulldozers would stall or veer off course. Workers reported hearing voices underground. Some refused to return after stepping inside. One crewman had a seizure and claimed he saw someone watching him from beneath the floor. After 3 failed attempts, the city shut the project down indefinitely. They asked Elliot to come back for another inspection. He refused. 2 nights later, he awoke to the sound of glass shattering. A mirror in his hallway had cracked clean down the center. On the floor beneath it was a footprint, bare, damp, facing into the house. He stayed at a hotel that night, but even there the whispers followed, the voice of the hooded man echoing in his ears. "You opened the way," it said. "You looked into the hollow." That morning, Elliot checked himself into a psychiatric ward, voluntarily, told them he was losing his mind, that he was seeing things, hearing things. They ran tests, prescribed medication. Nothing helped. One nurse reported that he wouldn't stop drawing symbols, circles filled with angles, the same ones carved into the altar. He filled notebooks with them, said they kept the mirror closed. Then one day, he was gone. No signs of forced exit. No one saw him leave. Security cameras caught nothing. The only clue was in his room, a cracked shard of glass on the floor, and the words written in pen across the wall. "He walks in reflection." The city sealed the church permanently after that. No more demolition attempts. No public access. They fenced off the area and labeled it a historical hazard site. But locals know better. They say the church doesn't like being disturbed, that it shows you what lies on the other side of mirrors if you look too closely. And if you hear whispering, especially when you're alone near a reflection, whatever you do, don't turn around, because he'll be standing behind you. Not in your world, just in the glass, waiting. Harper's apartment had always felt like a sanctuary, a small but cozy studio on the 9th floor of an aging high-rise in the heart of the city. It wasn't much, just a single large room with a kitchenette, a creaky old radiator, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the flickering lights of downtown. But to Harper, it was freedom. After years of bouncing between roommates and renting basements with paper-thin walls, she'd finally carved out a quiet space of her own. She moved in during the fall. The building was quiet, occupied mostly by older tenants who kept to themselves. Her landlord, Mr. Lish, was a hunched, soft-spoken man with a hearing aid and a perpetually stained sweater vest. He had warned her about the elevator, said it was finicky, prone to sulking when the weather got bad. Harper didn't mind. She was young. She could take the stairs. But there was one thing he told her that didn't sit right. The windows like to lie sometimes, he said, eyes not quite meeting hers. Don't trust what you see in the glass. It's never just a reflection. She had laughed politely, assuming he was joking. But his face had remained grave. There was something about the way he said it, like a man reciting instructions, not sharing a story. At first, she forgot all about it. Her days were filled with work, errands, and the quiet joy of solitude. She'd come home, kick off her shoes, microwave a frozen dinner, and curl up in bed with a book. Sometimes she'd sit by the window with a glass of wine and watch the city move below her. It was peaceful, familiar, until it wasn't. It started small, a flicker, a trick of the light. She was brushing her teeth one night, leaning toward the mirror in her bathroom, when she caught a movement out of the corner of her eye, her reflection lagging just a fraction of a second behind. She blinked, leaned closer, waved a hand. Nothing. The reflection was normal again, chalked it up to sleep deprivation, and went to bed. But the next night, it happened again, this time in the hallway mirror, just for a moment. Her reflection didn't turn when she did, like it was watching her, waiting. She laughed nervously and shook it off. Too many horror movies, maybe, too much time alone. But something about it felt wrong. Like a thread had come loose in the fabric of her apartment, and she couldn't quite find where it started. Then came the dreams. In them, she would wake up in bed just like normal. Same room, same light through the windows, but everything was off. The walls were warped slightly, as if the room was breathing. Her furniture was wrong, twisted into crude, unfinished versions of itself. And the windows, they were black, not dark. Black, as if the world outside had vanished. She'd rise from bed in the dream, her movements sluggish like she was walking through water, and approach the window. On the other side, a figure would be waiting. Not outside, inside the glass. As if the window was a membrane, and the figure lived in the space between panes. She could never see its face. Only the silhouette, tall, featureless, completely still. The worst part was what it did. It would raise its hand slowly and press it against the glass from the other side. And Harper, helpless, would press her hand against it in return. Every time. She never meant to. Never wanted to. But her body would move without her permission. Then she'd wake up, heart pounding, hand tingling, always her right hand. Weeks passed, and the dreams worsened. She stopped sleeping, stopped using mirrors. She even covered the large windows with thick blackout curtains. Her once perfect apartment began to feel like a trap, like she wasn't alone anymore. She started noticing small changes. Her reflection would smile a half-second too late. Sometimes, when she passed by the mirror quickly, she'd see her reflection facing the wrong way. When she tried to record it, just to prove to herself she wasn't crazy, nothing happened. Her phone would glitch. Footage would be blank or corrupted. Her friends didn't believe her. And why would they? She sounded unhinged. Then came the incident with the hallway. Late one night, Harper was returning from the corner store. It was raining, and her coat was soaked through by the time she made it inside. She took the stairs up as usual, water dripping from her sleeves. As she turned the corner onto her floor, she froze. Her apartment door was open. Not fully, just cracked. Enough to see the glow of her living room lamp inside. She hadn't left it on. She knew she hadn't. Slowly, quietly, she crept forward, gripping her keys between her knuckles like a weapon. The hallway was silent, but something about the stillness made her skin crawl. She pushed the door open. Everything looked normal. Nothing was missing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. But when she stepped inside, she felt it. Someone had been there. She couldn't explain it, but it was like walking into a room that had just been vacated, like the air was still settling from a presence. She walked slowly through the apartment, checking every room. Bathroom, closet, under the bed. Nothing. But when she passed the covered window in the living room, she stopped. The curtain was moving slightly, as if someone had brushed past it. She yanked it aside. The city was gone. Instead of the lights and skyline she saw every night, the window revealed a vast, colorless void, like an ocean of static. Floating in the middle of it was the figure. Closer now, clearer. Still faceless, but larger than she remembered. Its hand was pressed against the glass again. Harper stumbled back, heart racing, slamming the curtain shut. That was the night she decided to leave. She packed a bag, barely thinking, and headed for the elevator. She didn't care if it stalled or sulked. She just wanted out. But when she pressed the button, nothing happened. The light didn't come on. The doors didn't open. She took the stairs. But no matter how many flights she descended, she always ended up back on the 9th floor. After the 3rd attempt, she stopped. Stood in the hallway, panting, palms sweating. The hallway lights flickered above her. And then she heard it. A knock. Not on her door, on the window. The sound carried all the way down the corridor, a dull, rhythmic tapping that seemed to echo from inside her apartment. She turned slowly. Her door, still open, was now pitch black inside. The knock came again, and with it, a voice, whispering, calling her name, not loud, not threatening, just soft, inviting. Harper backed away. She didn't sleep that night, just sat curled up on the floor by the stairwell, waiting for the sun to rise. When it finally did, she tried the elevator again. This time, it worked. She left everything behind, didn't even lock the door. When she explained what happened to Mr. Lish, his expression didn't change. "I warned you," he said quietly. "It's not just a view. It's a window, both ways." Harper never returned to the apartment. But sometimes, when she passes tall buildings and catches a glimpse of herself in a window, she looks closely, just to make sure the reflection moves when she does. So far, it always has. But she no longer feels like she's the only one checking. Sometimes, it feels like the reflection is watching her first. When Owen took the night shift at the Wayridge Community Library, he thought it would be a peaceful, easy job, maybe even a little boring. The library was ancient, a relic from the early 1900s tucked between two long-forgotten apartment buildings in a part of the city that never quite kept up with the times. Still, Owen had always liked quiet places. He preferred the company of books over people, and the solitude of an overnight custodial job seemed perfect for him. The pay was decent. The hours were calm, and most importantly, the building was empty after 10 p.m., or at least it was supposed to be. On paper, his duties were simple. Walk the floors every hour, restock any carts left out by the staff, lock the main entrance, and turn off the lights after closing. The library had 4 levels. The main lobby, 2 upper floors of shelves, and a basement full of archives that hadn't been touched in decades. On his first day, the daytime supervisor, Ellen, handed him a large ring of keys and a laminated map. She gave him the rundown, pointed out the old fuse box in the basement, and warned him about 2 things. Never go into the restricted room. she said, pointing to a small boxed area on the basement map marked with red ink. That's Old Town Records, sealed off. Hasn't been opened since before I started here. And if you hear anything weird, just ignore it. This building makes noises. It's ancient. Owen had raised an eyebrow at that, but didn't press her. He assumed she was talking about creaky pipes, old floorboards, maybe the occasional mouse. Standard stuff for a building this old. But Ellen hadn't meant mice. The first few nights were uneventful. Owen brought a thermos of coffee, his headphones, and a worn-out copy of Lovecraft stories he had half-finished 3 times before. He'd make his hourly rounds, make sure all the doors were locked, maybe restock a few misplaced returns, and then sit behind the main desk reading until sunrise. But on the 5th night, he noticed something strange. At 1:13 a.m., during his second round, he passed by the large wall clock in the lobby and noticed it had stopped. The second hand was stuck, twitching, just a hair before the 12. He tapped the glass. Nothing. Shrugging, he made a note to tell maintenance, then continued walking. He didn't realize it at the time, but something else had changed too. The library smelled different. Subtle at first, just a faint, bitter scent he couldn't place, like decaying paper mixed with something older, something wet. He checked the restrooms, thinking maybe a leak had sprung, but everything looked fine. He brushed it off. Just old building quirks, like Ellen said. But by the 7th night, the sound began. It was subtle, distant. A low hum like a whisper stretched too thin. It started in the basement. Owen would hear it as soon as he opened the stairwell door, soft, rhythmic, pulsing in the darkness. At first, he assumed it was the old heating system. The library had radiators from another century and an HVAC unit that probably hadn't been serviced since the 90s. But when he asked Ellen about it the next day, she just gave him a tight smile and changed the subject. Then came the books. They started appearing where they didn't belong. At first, it was minor. A few out-of-place titles on the return cart. A reference book from the restricted basement collection, somehow sitting on a 3rd-floor reading table. Owen thought maybe a staff member had brought it up earlier and forgotten. He'd return them and not think twice. But one night, he came across something he couldn't explain. At 2 a.m., he walked into the 2nd-floor reading area and stopped cold. Every chair, every single one, had a book placed neatly in the center of the seat. All of them open, all of them flipped to the exact same page. Page 237, no matter the title, no matter the genre. All open to 237. He stood in the middle of the room, staring. The titles ranged from children's fairy tales to dusty encyclopedias to horror novels. He picked one up and flipped through it, trying to find the meaning of the page. Nothing. Just mid-chapter content. Random. But the quiet in the room felt charged, like someone had been there moments before. Like whoever had placed the books was still watching. Owen left them there. He went downstairs, locked the main door again, and sat behind the front desk in silence. That was the first night he didn't finish his shift. He returned the next day, unsure whether he'd be fired or reprimanded, but Ellen said nothing. In fact, she seemed relieved to see him. "I was worried you wouldn't come back," she said quietly, almost to herself. After that, things escalated. The books didn't just appear out of place, they began following him, literally. He'd walk into a room, and a book would fall off the shelf. Always the same way. Spine first, landing open. Page 237. No title, just that same page. He tried to avoid the basement entirely, but on the 10th night, the elevator stopped responding. The stairs to the 3rd floor suddenly ended in a blank wall. The library had changed. Its architecture began to fold in on itself. Rooms no longer led where they should. Hallways extended for too long. Doors that used to lock refused to stay shut. Something in the structure had bent, and the whispering grew louder. He began to hear it throughout the building, not just the basement. At first, it was gibberish, random syllables. Then it started forming words. His name, repeated softly, endlessly. He wore headphones to drown it out, but it didn't help. The voice was inside the building now, inside the walls, inside him. Owen started to see her, a woman. She never moved, just stood in the dark between bookshelves, half-shadowed. He'd catch her out of the corner of his eye. Tall, dressed in a tattered gray dress, her face obscured by long black hair. She never came closer, never said anything, just stared, waiting. He once tried to walk toward her. As he approached, the lights flickered. The air grew cold, metallic. The smell of rot thickened. And when he rounded the corner, she was gone. But in her place was a single book. Open. Page 237. It took every ounce of willpower he had to stay until sunrise. By then, the library had gone silent again. The rooms were normal. The air was clear. No figure. No misplaced books. Just the echo of a building pretending to be normal again. He finally confronted Ellen. "What's in the basement?" he asked. "What's behind the sealed door?" She didn't lie, didn't deny it. "There used to be more of us," she said, staring past him. "Years ago, the night shift was a rotation, 4 of us at a time, until the door opened." "What's in there?" She took a long breath. "A record," she said. "Not a book. Something older. Something handwritten. We never cataloged it. We weren't supposed to. But it calls to people. People like you. Like me. People who listen too closely. Who notice the cracks." Owen quit that night. Left the keys on the front desk and walked out without saying goodbye. He never returned to the library, never went near that block again. But he still dreams about it. Every few weeks, he wakes in the middle of the night to find a book open beside his bed. Page 237. And sometimes, when he flips it shut and glances up at the mirror above his dresser, he sees her, waiting,